stage, but hello, good morning, welcome to Pride and Prejudice 2018. My warm thanks. It's really lovely to see so many friends, so many people who've been in the past, but also obviously a group of new people. I do welcome you. I do thank you also for taking the time today to come along. It's really a great pleasure to have you here. This is the our third Pride and Prejudice event globally. I have to say that it is not yet, I think, immutably durable, although I would say that we have survived and we are now moving forward, I think, magnificently, and in large part due to all of your support. So I would like to thank you for that. Also, I might just say that online, we're streaming online, we're streaming live online. We have a fantastic audience online too. And so I would just like to welcome those who are looking in online, and thank you very much for joining us, and also thank our sponsors too, and I will get to that in a moment. So this is being staged across the world, here in Hong Kong until 4:30 this afternoon when we hand over to London, and then for London an 8-hour session, and then handing over to New York. It's a rather unusual format, but it brings in people across the world, I think, in a completely unique way, both online and in the physical event itself. So wonderful, again, to be able, I think, to bring this to fruition, and thank you all for all of your support. As I said, I'm Charlie Goddard. I'm the Editorial Director for Asia Pacific for EIU. I would like to introduce my co-moderators, Simon Baptist, who is the Global Chief Economist for EIU and also the Managing Director for EIU. Simon sitting down over there, and Miranda Johnson, down over there too, who is the Southeast Asia correspondent for The Economist. The theme today, Paths to Advocacy, is looking and examining whether and how companies can become more proactive advocates for progress on LGBT issues. Why so? It's not that there hasn't been progress. There's been, in many ways, a lot of progress over the last decade particularly, and in some countries, in Europe, in parts of America too, I think it's fair to say, excuse me, that few social causes had really advanced as rapidly as the causes around LGBT issues. So it really has been a remarkable decade, I think. And most recently here in Asia, of course, in the last year, we've seen in Australia and in Taiwan really important moves towards gay marriage, but really important moves generally towards a far improved environment for LGBT people. That progress, I think, as we all recognize, is certainly under some degree of threat in this era of populism and in this Trumpist period in the United States particularly, but also in some parts of Europe. I don't know if you've seen in Italy the rise of the right again, suggesting that many of the LGBT victories, legislative victories there may be, not many, but some of those victories may be rolled back. So this populism is certainly potentially encroaching onto as a threat to LGBT rights. While I think there are also signs of the incremental progress that has been made in some countries, in China, in Asia, for example, in China, and not so long ago in Indonesia, some of that progress now seems to be really at significant threat. It may be cauterized or even, I think, reversed. So far from being positive, and I wish I could come to you with that positive message, but far from being positive, I think the picture is grayer and much more ambiguous than perhaps it was just even a year ago. And of course, we never in Asia thought complacency was an option. After all, there are many, many countries in Asia where the situation for LGBT rights is still pretty egregious. But those that I think had thought that, in a sense, the victory had been won, for example, particularly in the United States, those people that had thought that that might have been the case are now themselves, in many ways, back on the streets in defense of these rights. So I think it's opportune in a way that we have come to this particular theme today, past advocacy, adapted loosely, I must say, from some work, research that has been done by Kenji Yoshino, who's one of our speakers in New York later in the day, who suggests 3 different ways in which companies in different, multiple countries address LGBT inclusion. The first of those is when in Rome model, which basically suggests that companies simply adhere to the norms, to the legislative and social norms of a particular country. The embassy model, in which companies seek to enforce pro-LGBT policies in their workplace, but don't seek to do so outside of their workplace, keep it within the 4 walls. And the advocacy model, in which companies seek to change, to proactively change norms, to change regulations, legislation, and behavior outside of their own workplace. So based loosely on this framework, and I say loosely on this framework, we are planning to explore today how companies, both foreign multinational companies, this is obviously a place where a lot of the focus is around them, but also domestic companies, based on that loose framework, can be encouraged to shift to a more proactive stance on LGBT issues. Not just how they can become more vocal, publicly vocal advocates, but also, I think, as Kenji was saying in his research, moving from one model to the other, moving from simply accepting local norms to perhaps being even more proactive internally around their engagement on LGBT issues. We have a lot of sessions today. We've got a lot to get through. There's a lot of speakers, a lot of short, sharp sessions in a slightly different format, and we hope you enjoy it. I think it's going to be stimulating and short and sharp. Lots to squeeze in. I think we're looking across the spectrum as well at LGBT issues. We're drawing in other examples of advocacy as well. We're not just looking at LGBT advocacy, just so that we get a sense and a flavor of how others are tackling advocacy in this environment. We've got spotlights on India, we've got spotlights on Greater China and on Japan. There is simultaneous translation for you because we will have people speaking in Japanese and in Mandarin, so do make sure, if you don't speak those languages, that you have the simultaneous translation at your side. Of course, this is an Economist event. We really do encourage your participation. It's never been a problem in our Pride and Prejudice events, but I do encourage you to actively participate in this. This is your event as much as ours, and we'd really like to hear your thoughts and your views, as well as your questions. So just put your hand up. At any point in the proceedings, put your hand up. We have people with microphones who can come round and get you joined into the conversation. Do please, as I said, join us in that conversation. Please join us on social media by tweeting your thoughts at #EconPride. I don't know whether those are up there, but they should be on your table, on the tents on your table. And by following us on Twitter at Economist Events. You have an app. There is an app which you can download. I think that's also on the tents on your table, the details of that. If you have any problems, do please just come to one of us around the room and we'll help you, if we can, download the app for you. And the app includes an ability to interconnect, to connect with other people in the room, as well as follow the program, but also to look at some of the background research, including the survey that I'll talk about very briefly in a second. And of course, it has the evaluation forms on it as well, so please do fill those evaluation forms out across the day, because we want to improve this, and we want to make sure that it's sustainable and durable over time, and your help is really important in doing that. Just last and certainly not least, I really want to thank our sponsors, our global supporters, Alex Partners, Morgan Stanley, T. Rowe Price and William Blair, the Regional Advocate, Goldman Sachs, the Regional Ally, ABN AMRO Bank and American Airlines, the Regional Supporter, Nomura and Ogilvy and Mather, and the host sponsor, Citi, Heydrich and Struggles, Manulife Financial Corporation, and the United Nations Development Programme, our friends in the back there, who we do a number of smaller events with around the region. Really, this is not possible without their support. So please, a warm hand for everybody who has supported them. We'll say a little later, too, something about our 175th anniversary, of which this is an important part. The editor-in-chief of The Economist, Annie Minton-Beddoes, has put in place a big program, an initiative, should I say, around the open future and around open societies, of course, of which this forms this issue, as well as a number of other rights, form a hugely important part. We'll mention a little bit more about that at the end of the session, because we'll be holding an event in Hong Kong later in the year around that. But Pride and Prejudice is an integral part of that program. Okay, I'm trying to get through this quickly, but let me move straight to our survey. If I can just have the survey up there, please. Thank you. So every year we do a survey attached to the Pride and Prejudice event. And this one is hot off the press, and so I'm just familiarizing myself with it at the moment. So I'll run through a few top-line results in the survey for you. This is, as I said, the third survey attached to our third Pride and Prejudice event. The first of those, for those of you that don't know, haven't seen the surveys before, the first of those looked in a general way at how executives, what their attitudes of executives were towards LGBT rights and diversity and inclusion in the workplace. The second look took a group of key workplace key workplace groups. So it looked at young workers, it looked at women, and it looked at company leaders, and tried to understand how they were moving forward LGBT diversity and inclusion issues. And this year, as I said, we're focusing squarely on advocacy. So the changing environment for and attitudes towards corporate advocacy for LGBT rights and inclusion. Let me just find where there we go. Very briefly, we surveyed 1,000 executives from a range of different companies and geographies and sizes of companies. 70% of those were from the senior executive and above C-level people, and 30% were below the manager level. So a wide cross-section of companies across the world. Firstly, let me just say, I think, in a sense, one of the things that came across was that there was a bit of the LGBT issues were getting lost in the chaos. And by that, I think I mean that so many other types of rights are now under threat or continue to be face an uphill challenge. And there's I think so much, there's a flood of headlines around everything from refugees to gender issues, to particularly conflict around gender issues, conflict around race and around ethnicity, that in many ways it is difficult for the LGBT agenda to rise further than perhaps it has. Just 6% of those people surveyed on LGBT rights said that LGBT rights are being most negatively affected by the current political situation. And just 5% said that they expected didn't expect, should I say, LGBT rights to be part of a clear agenda for the public going forward in the next year. So LGBT rights, I think, are in many ways buried in the melee of all of these other challenges and problems. And as with other rights, certainly, as the other rights struggles have proven, certainly, the battle is not won and does require a very long, hard, sustained fight. And hard-won progress can slip away very easily. This man, rather flattering, this picture of Fabrizio Munoz, Costa Rica's presidential candidate. I'm not sure if you're aware, but he ran on an anti-same-sex marriage platform in Costa Rica, following a ruling from the Inter-American Court on Human Rights that countries in the region should legalize same-sex marriage. He lost, as you may well be aware, but I think his popularity in that vote said and demonstrated that hard-won LGBT rights, which they were in Costa Rica, hard-won LGBT rights were somewhat fragile. And that phenomenon is not limited to developing countries. It's certainly limited, as I said earlier, it's certainly not limited to developing countries, but certainly in developed countries too. That is something that's under a great deal of threat. 57% of respondents of executives agreed that if left unchallenged, the current political climate could undo progress made in LGBT inclusion, which I thought was a rather startling figure. Certainly the rise of a narrowly conceived nativism and populism is something that's not compatible with the open views and the open-minded and inclusive views needed to have progress around LGBT. I'm going to move through Milton Friedman and come to him at the end. When companies were asked to rate themselves on various factors related to business performance, the relationship between LGBT advocacy and strength in various areas of business performance was once again really striking. And I don't think it's it's no news to anybody in this room that this adds simply to the evidence for the business case for both LGBT inclusion, but also for advocacy around LGBT inclusion. Companies that engage, what this is saying is that companies that engage or perceive that they engage in LGBT advocacy perform better on various measures of business performance than their competitors. And so you can see the various measures here on innovation, on talent retention, the usual set of things. But once again, I think an affirmation that having strong LGBT policies and advocacy really do help your company. No surprises here too, I think. To stay relevant in the race for talent, businesses need to live up to the growing expectations for advocacy within their workforces. So 47% here, I think very interesting figure, share the belief that employees expect companies to play a greater role in influencing policymakers. This is particularly true amongst younger workers as well. Just looking forward, some reasonably good news and also some less positive news, I think, as well. Businesses in the survey recognize that they will have to step up if they want to be successful in this area. Nearly half of the respondents said that their firms, agreed that their businesses will become a more prominent agent of progress for LGBT rights over the course of the next 3 years. That said, only a third of those companies expect to put additional investment into this process, and I think that's a little bit of not a contradiction, but a little bit of a countervailing trend against where I think they feel they should be. We asked this question, and the question is, looking ahead 3 years, do you believe it will get easier or more difficult for your company to engage in public advocacy? We asked this question of those companies that aren't strong advocates and don't rate themselves as a role model for LGBT version inclusion. And I think it shows quite clearly, whereas many companies that are already engaged in advocacy are going to remain that way and possibly increase their advocacy, those that are not, and as we said, those that are still in the shadows are not going to move at all, and that's rather depressing. So Sorry to end on a bit of a negative note, but that's where the results leave us. So back to Milton Friedman. And Milton Friedman, of course, said that he famously wrote that social responsibility of business is to widen and to increase its profits. And of course, this is Mark Benioff from Salesforce, who echoes a more modern message, and that is that companies, and I quote, can do more than just make money. They can serve others. The business of business is improving the state of the world. That message, too, is echoed by the likes of Larry Fink, the CEO and founder of BlackRock, who the largest investor in the world at this point in time, who sees the social sides of being business, the needs of businesses to be not just about profits, but about all the other important sustainability and social issues as fundamental. Indeed, if they don't, the risk is that a company like BlackRock may not invest in them, or may divest in them even. So that's our survey. I urge you to read it online. That's just a few of the takeaways from it. It's on the app. I'll be happy, along with my colleagues, to answer any further questions around it. But I hope at least that sets a frame for some of the discussions today around advocacy. And with that, let me invite Simon Baptist up to the stage for the first session. Simon.